still live about 4 miles outside Waynesville, Ohio, off Route 42, in the house my aunt left me. I want to say that first because people always ask if I sold it. I didn't. I don't know if that makes me brave or stupid, but I'm still there, and I still lock the doors twice now instead of once, and I still have a light on in the kitchen every single night, even in July when the electric bill is stupid. I'm going to try to lay this out the way it actually happened, not the way it sounds when I tell it at parties, because honestly, by the time you add the dramatic pauses, it starts sounding like something out of a movie, and it wasn't like a movie. It was slow. It was quiet. Most of it doesn't sound like anything at all until you put it together after. I'm a nurse. I work nights at a hospital in Middletown, 12-hour shifts, 3 or 4 a week, depending on the schedule, usually 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I moved out to my aunt's old farmhouse in the spring of 2023 after she passed. She'd left it to me because I was the only one in the family who ever visited her, which honestly just meant I drove out on Sundays sometimes and helped her with her garden. The house sits back off the road, maybe a quarter mile down a gravel driveway, surrounded on 3 sides by a soybean field that belongs to a neighboring farm. There's a tree line at the back of the property, and past that, nothing but more fields for a couple miles until you hit the next house. I like the quiet. I want to be clear about that, because I think people assume if you live alone out in the country, something bad is inevitable, like you're asking for it. I wasn't scared living out there. I grew up in a town about 20 minutes from Waynesville. My parents still live there, and the countryside never felt foreign to me. I liked that I could see stars at night. I liked that when I got home from a bad shift, nobody was around to see me sit in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes before I could make myself go inside. The first thing I noticed, and I didn't think anything of it at the time, was in early September of last year. I was getting home from a shift around 7:40 in the morning, still light out, tired in that specific way where your eyes feel sandy and your hands are a little shaky from too much coffee. I pulled into the driveway, and there was a light on in my kitchen. Not a big deal, except I distinctly remembered turning it off before I left for work the night before, because I remember the sound the switch makes, a little clack, and I remember thinking about it because I'd stubbed my toe on the doorframe on my way out and said something out loud to nobody about it. I stood in the driveway for a second, looking at that yellow rectangle of light in the window, and told myself I just didn't remember right. That happens. You do something so automatic you don't actually store the memory of doing it. I went inside, the house was empty, nothing was out of place, and I just turned the light off and went to bed. I didn't think about it again for almost 3 weeks. The second thing was the dog. I don't have a dog, but my neighbor down the road, the Pattersons, they have 2 hounds that mostly stay penned up near their barn, maybe half a mile from my place. Sound carries strange out in the country at night, especially when it's still and cold, and I was used to hearing them bark sometimes, usually at nothing, deer probably, or a raccoon getting into something. But starting around the end of September, I started noticing they'd bark around the same time almost every night I was home, somewhere between 1 and 2 a.m. Not the whole night, just a stretch of maybe 10-15 minutes, and then quiet again. I only really clocked it as a pattern because I was awake for it. My sleep schedule is already wrecked from night shifts, so on my off days I'm often up at weird hours anyway, lying in bed scrolling my phone, half watching something on my laptop propped on the nightstand. I remember one night in particular, October 3rd, I know the date because I texted my sister that day about our mom's birthday. I was lying there around 1:50 a.m. watching some show, and the dog started up. And this time, underneath the barking, I thought I heard a car. Not driving past, not on the road at all, because my road doesn't get much traffic, and you can hear vehicles from a long way off out there. This sounded closer, like an engine idling. I sat up and turned my laptop volume down and just listened for a minute, but by the time I'd done that, it had stopped. Or maybe it had never been there, and it was just my brain doing what brains do at 2 in the morning. I didn't get up and check. I want to be honest that I didn't get up and check. Because for a long time afterward, I wished I had. And for just as long, I was glad I hadn't. The thing that actually made me start paying attention, really paying attention, was the trail cam. My aunt had put up a cheap trail camera years back, strapped to a fence post at the edge of the field behind the house, originally to catch whatever was getting into her garden, rabbits or groundhogs, that kind of thing. I'd forgotten it even existed until I was cleaning out the shed in October and found the little SD card viewer she used to check it. Out of curiosity more than anything, I put fresh batteries in the camera and reattached it, mostly as a project, something to do on a slow weekend. I checked it about 10 days later. Most of it was nothing. Deer, a couple possums, one very blurry photo of what might have been a coyote, and then there was a set of 3 photos, all time-stamped the same night, October 14th, between 1:47 a.m. and 1:52 a.m. In the first one, there's nothing unusual, just the field, silver gray in the flash, the tree line in the background. In the second one, taken about 2 minutes later, there's a shape at the very edge of the frame, right where the field meets the tree line. It's dark and small in the picture, and honestly could have been a lot of things. A trash bag caught on a branch. A deer standing at a strange angle. I told myself that. The third photo, another 2 minutes after that, the shape is gone. I sat at my kitchen table looking at those 3 pictures for probably 20 minutes. I zoomed in on the shape as much as the resolution would let me, which wasn't much. It just turned into gray pixels. I remember the exact feeling in my chest. Not quite fear yet, more like the sensation you get when you think you've left the stove on and you're driving back to check. That low hum of maybe I'm being paranoid, maybe I'm not. I didn't call anyone. I didn't call the police, because what would I even say? There's a blurry shape in a trail cam photo. I did start locking my doors more carefully. I'd always locked them, but I started actually testing the handle after, pulling on it to make sure the deadbolt caught. Small thing, felt silly doing it, did it anyway. Over the next couple of weeks, small things kept happening that I could each individually explain away, but that were starting to stack up in a way I didn't like. A rake that I kept leaning against the shed was lying flat on the ground one morning, and I told myself the wind did it, even though it hadn't been windy. The kitchen light thing happened again, twice more, both times after night shifts. I started wondering if I had some kind of automatic behavior I genuinely didn't remember, and I actually looked up sleepwalking and automatic behaviors online, which tells you where my head was at, trying so hard to find a boring explanation that I'd rather believe I was doing something involuntary and strange myself than believe someone else was. The dogs kept barking around 1 to 2 a.m. more nights than not. I started a note in my phone, just times, no explanation, like I was building a case for something, though I wasn't sure what. The night everything changed was November 9th, a Thursday. I remember because I had a shift the next day, and I was trying to force myself to sleep early, which never really works for me, but I was in bed by 11, lights off, phone face down on the nightstand like I was trying to trick my brain into thinking it was a normal bedtime. I woke up around 1:15 to the dogs going off, which by then was almost background noise to me, and I remember feeling annoyed more than anything, rolling over, pulling the blanket up. And then I heard something that wasn't the dogs. A creak from downstairs. My house is old, built in the 60s, and it creaks constantly, settling sounds, the kind of noise you stop hearing after a while because it's just the house being a house. But this creak had a rhythm to it, not the random pop of wood contracting in the cold. Weight, moving and stopping and moving again. Like someone walking slowly and pausing between steps, I lay there completely still. I want to describe what that felt like because I don't think I'd ever actually felt it before. That specific stillness where your whole body goes rigid and your ears feel like they're straining forward even though ears don't work that way. My heart was going so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was trying to remember if I'd locked the back door, running through the motion in my head, picturing my hand on the deadbolt. And I genuinely couldn't remember because by then, locking up was so automatic I had no distinct memory of it. Same as I hadn't had a distinct memory of that kitchen light back in September. Another creak, then nothing for maybe 30 seconds. Then a sound I can only describe as a soft thud, low, like something set down carefully rather than dropped. I reached over, moving as slow as I could make myself move, and got my phone off the nightstand. My hands were shaking bad enough that I fumbled the passcode twice. I didn't call 911 yet. I don't know why. I think some part of me was still telling myself it was nothing, that I'd call and they'd show up and it'd be a raccoon that got into the mudroom through a gap I didn't know about, and I'd feel humiliated. I opened my texts instead and sent one to my coworker Danielle, who I knew would still be awake because she was on shift that night. I typed something like, "I think someone is in my house," and hit send, and then I just sat there in the dark, holding the phone like it was a weapon. The floor creaked again, and this time it was closer, like it was near the bottom of the stairs. I got up. I know that sounds like a bad decision, and looking back I think it was, but staying in that bed with the door unlocked, no way to barricade it, felt worse than moving. I went to my bedroom door as quiet as I could, and I locked it, this cheap little privacy lock that a determined toddler could probably get through, but it was something. I stood with my back against it, and I called 911. I gave them my address in a voice that didn't sound like mine, too fast, words tripping over each other. The dispatcher was calm, told me to stay quiet, stay where I was, deputies were on the way. It'd be about 10 to 15 minutes given how far out I was. 10 to 15 minutes is nothing when you say it out loud. It felt like an hour. I didn't hear anything else on the stairs after that. That was almost worse. I stood there straining to hear footsteps, anything, and there was just silence, which meant either whoever it was had left or whoever it was standing very still somewhere in my house, listening for me the same way I was listening for them. At some point, and I still don't know how long into that wait it was, I heard my back door. Not slamming, nothing dramatic, just the specific sound of it opening and the little chime of the loose screen door swinging after it, the one that never quite latches all the way and taps against the frame in the wind. Then the deputies got there and did a full sweep of the house and the property. Nothing. No sign of forced entry on any door, which they pointed out more than once, in a way that I could tell meant they were wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing, or worse, if I'd left a door unlocked myself, and was embarrassed to say so. My back door wasn't damaged, the lock wasn't broken, it was just unlocked, and I could not, and still cannot, tell you with certainty whether I locked it that night or not. That's the detail that still gets me. I've gone back and forth on it more times than I can count. Some nights I'm sure I locked it, I can almost feel the motion in my hand. Other nights, I'm not sure of anything. They found a boot print in the soft dirt near the mudroom door, partial, not enough for a cast, they said. And on the kitchen counter, a small thing that took me 2 full days to even notice, was a pack of crackers from my own pantry, opened, 3 or 4 gone, resealed and set back on the counter instead of back in the cabinet where I keep them. That detail is the one I've never been able to shake. Not the footsteps, not the boot print, not even the dogs barking on some kind of schedule for weeks beforehand. Someone was in my house long enough and calm enough to open a box of crackers, eat some, and put the box back down. Not hide it. Not take it with them. Just leave it there for me to find, whether they meant for me to notice or not. I moved into my parents' place for about 6 weeks after that. The sheriff's department did what they could, extra patrols down my road for a while, but there was nothing to actually go on. No prints besides a partial boot mark, no DNA they could use. My aunt's trail cam photos were the only other piece of anything, and they were too blurry to be useful for identification, just enough to confirm, at least to me, that whatever had been standing at the edge of that field back in October was connected to whatever had been in my house in November. I did eventually move back. I told you that already. I put in a real security system, cameras on every door, motion lights around the whole perimeter of the house, and I got a dog of my own, a shepherd mix named Copper, who sleeps in my room now, which he did not used to do. Nothing's happened since, not that I've noticed. Not that the cameras have caught. The dogs down the road still bark sometimes in the middle of the night, and every single time, for just a second, my whole body goes back to that stillness, that straining, before I can talk myself back down. Here's the part I still think about more than anything else. About 4 months after it happened, I was going through my closet, getting some winter clothes down from a shelf near the top that I don't touch most of the year. Behind a box of old sweaters, pushed back against the wall where I never look, there was a folded piece of paper. Not a note, nothing written on it, just a page torn out of a spiral notebook, blank, folded in half, and then in half again, small enough to fit in a pocket. It wasn't mine. I don't own a spiral notebook like that. I have no idea how long it had been there, whether it was from November, or from before that, or from some point after I moved back in that I never noticed. I didn't touch it with my bare hands. I put it in a Ziploc bag and I still have it sitting in a drawer, and I've never been able to decide if it means anything at all, or if it's just a piece of paper that's been in that closet since before I even moved in, left over from my aunt, from some renter before her, from nothing. I never found out who it was. Nobody was ever caught. Nothing ever showed up on any camera again. The case is still technically open, but I know what that means practically, which is nothing. I still live there. I still lock the doors twice. And some nights, when the dogs start up around 1 in the morning, I lie there and listen. And I tell myself it's nothing, the same way I told myself back in September that I just didn't remember turning off a light. Story 2. The Man at the Fence Line. This happened in Cambridge, New York, up in Washington County, about 40 minutes from the Vermont border. Not the Cambridge in Massachusetts. People always assume that this is a tiny town, maybe 2,000 people, mostly farmland and back roads that turn to gravel the second you leave the center of town. I lived about 3 miles outside the village itself, on County Route 61, in a rental house that sat on 5 acres, mostly cornfields on one side and woods on the other. I want to say up front that I don't fully know what happened to me. I know what I experienced. I don't know what it means, and I've made peace, mostly, with never knowing. My name's Josh. At the time I was 26, working as a delivery driver for a regional grocery distributor, the kind of job where you're out at 4 a.m. loading a truck and done by early afternoon most days. I liked the schedule. I liked having my afternoons free. I'd moved up there about 8 months before any of this started, mostly because the rent was cheap and I wanted space, coming from a cramped apartment in Troy where I could hear my neighbor's TV through the wall. The house I rented had been empty for almost 2 years before I moved in, according to the landlord, a guy named Pete, who lived about 20 minutes away and mostly left me alone. It back up against a stretch of woods that ran for maybe half a mile before hitting another property, and along the edge of my yard there was an old wire fence, waist high, mostly rusted, clearly meant to keep livestock in at some point decades ago. though there hadn't been animals on the land in years. I mention the fence because it matters later. For the first several months, nothing. I want to be clear that this wasn't a haunted house story where things were wrong from day one. I liked living there. I'd sit out on the back steps some evenings with a beer, watch the light go orange over the cornfield. Nothing eventful about it at all. Things started, as far as I can tell looking back, in late January of last year. Cold month, the kind of cold where the inside of your nose stings the second you step outside. I was coming home from a shift, maybe 2:30 in the afternoon, and as I pulled into my driveway, I saw a man standing at the fence line at the edge of the woods, just standing there, facing the house. I didn't think much of it at first. People walk dogs, hunt, whatever, out in that kind of area. I gave him a wave, the kind of neutral country wave you give anybody out there, and he didn't wave back. Didn't move at all, actually. Just stood there. I went inside, glanced back out the kitchen window a minute later, and he was gone. I mentioned it to Pete on the phone a few days later, just in passing. Asked if the woods behind the house were public land or somebody's private property, thinking maybe it was the owner checking on things. Pete said the land technically belonged to a logging company based out of Glens Falls that hadn't touched it in years, and no, he didn't know of anyone who'd have reason to be back there. I saw him again 9 days later. I know it was 9 days because I'd started, without really deciding to, keeping track on my phone's notes app. The same way I think a lot of people do when something bugs them enough that they want proof later that they're not imagining it. Same spot, same time roughly, early to mid-afternoon. Same stillness. This time I stood on my back steps and looked at him for a good 10-15 seconds, and he just looked back. Distance was maybe 80 yards, hard to make out details, but I remember he was wearing a dark green or brown jacket, something that blended into the tree line almost on purpose, and he had on a baseball cap pulled low. I called out, asked if he needed something, and he turned and walked into the woods, unhurried, like my voice hadn't startled him at all, just like he decided he was done. That one shook me more than the first time, mostly because of how unbothered he seemed. If it had been someone lost, someone confused, they'd have reacted to a stranger yelling at them. This felt more like he simply chose to leave once I'd acknowledged him, which is a different thing entirely, and it took me a couple days to be able to put words to why that bothered me so much. Over the following month, I saw him a total of 5 more times that I was sure of, and probably a couple more I only half caught out of the corner of my eye and told myself was a shadow or a low branch moving. He was always at the fence line, never closer, and always alone. I never saw a car. There's nowhere obvious to park along that stretch of woods. The nearest pull-off on the county road is close to half a mile away, which meant if he was walking from a vehicle, that was a serious walk through rough terrain in winter just to stand at my fence for a few minutes. I started closing my curtains earlier in the evening. Small thing, but it was the first real behavior change. I stopped sitting out back with a beer at sunset. I started parking my truck at an angle in the driveway so the headlights would sweep across that part of the yard when I pulled in, which I told myself was practical, better visibility, but really I think I wanted the light to hit that fence line, wanted to catch him in it if he was there. Late February, I finally called the sheriff's office non-emergency line and explained it, feeling a little stupid the whole time because when you say it out loud, a man has been standing at my fence, it doesn't sound like much. A deputy came out, walked the fence line with me, found nothing. No footprints, because the ground was frozen too hard to hold a print. No cigarette butts or trash, nothing. He was polite about it, said to call if it kept happening, or if the man ever came onto the property itself, but there wasn't much else to do with what I had. Here's where it stopped being just unsettling and started being frightening. Second week of March, a Tuesday. I was up around 11 p.m., hadn't been sleeping great. TV on low in the living room, some rerun I wasn't really watching. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Local area code. That's it. 2 words. I sat there for a solid minute just staring at it. I don't have a public number. I'm not on much social media. And even if I was, there's no reason a message like that connects to anything except somebody watching my house, watching me come and go, watching my truck specifically enough to comment on it. I texted back asking who it was. No response. I called the number, it rang twice, and went to a generic voicemail box with no name recorded. Just the automated robot voice reading back the digits. I didn't sleep much that night. I remember sitting in my living room with every light in the house on, which is a strange thing to admit as a grown man, but that's exactly what I did, and I kept the curtains shut and just sat there listening. 3 days after the text, I came home to find one of my porch lights unscrewed, not broken, just loosened enough in the socket that it wouldn't turn on, sitting slightly crooked in its fixture like someone had done it with their hands rather than it working itself loose. That side of the porch faced the driveway, and the path up to my front door, meaning whoever had done it wanted that specific area dark. I started staying at my buddy Marcus's place in town some nights after that. Not every night. I still had work and didn't want to abandon the house completely. Plus, admittedly, some part of me was embarrassed, worried people would think I was overreacting to a guy standing in some trees. But I was scared. I'll say that plainly. I was scared in a way that sat with me all day, not just at night. This low hum of wrongness that followed me around even at work, loading boxes onto a truck at 4 a.m, catching myself glancing over my shoulder in an empty parking lot for no reason. The last week of March, the thing happened that made me actually leave the house for good, at least for a while. I got home a little after 9 p.m., later than usual because of a delayed delivery route, tired, hungry, wanting nothing more than food in my bed. I noticed as I pulled up that the fixed porch light, the one I'd since had an electrician come tighten and check, was out again. I sat in the truck a minute, engine still running, headlights washing across the front of the house, and I made myself go in anyway because it was cold, and I was tired, and some part of me refused to keep being scared of my own front porch. I got inside, flipped the hall light, and everything looked normal. I made food, watched some TV, started getting ready for bed around 11:30. It was while I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom, which faces the back of the house, small frosted window above the sink, that I heard it. A single knock, not on the front door, on that bathroom window. One knock, deliberate, at chest height on a window that sits maybe 7 feet off the ground on the outside, meaning whoever did it either had a ladder or was standing on something, or was a lot taller than any person I'd ever normally think about. I did not open that window. I did not go outside. I turned off every light in the house except the hallway, grabbed my phone and my truck keys, and I left through the front door. Got in my truck and drove straight to Marcus's, hands shaking on the wheel the whole way, checking my mirrors more than the road in front of me. I called the sheriff's office again the next morning, and this time, with a knock on the window as an actual incident, an actual violation, they took a report more formally, had a deputy come look at the ground beneath that window. There were marks in the dirt, disturbed enough to suggest something had been standing there. Maybe a step stool or a low ladder, but again, no clear print. Ground too churned up by then between my own boot prints and general weather. I broke my lease about 3 weeks later. Pete was understanding about it, more understanding than I expected, honestly, and I found out afterward from a conversation with one of my old neighbors on that road that the tenant before me, a woman, had also left partway through her lease, though nobody I talked to seemed to know exactly why or wanted to say much more than that. I never got another text from that number. I never saw the man at the fence again. Not that last month I was still there, and Marcus went with me one weekend to help me move the rest of my stuff out, and we walked the fence line together in daylight just to look, and there was nothing there. No sign anyone had ever stood there at all, though of course frozen dirt and dead grass don't hold much of anything for long. The part that still gets to me, the detail I never resolved, happened on that last day moving out. Going through a box of stuff in the hall closet I hadn't touched all winter, mixed in with some extra bedding, there was a folded piece of paper towel, and wrapped inside it, a single house key, not mine. I checked against every key I owned, none of them matched, and it didn't fit my front or back door either. I tried both before I left for good. I have no idea whose key it was, how long it had been in that closet, whether it belonged to the tenant before me, the landlord, or someone else entirely. I still have it, sitting in a drawer in my current apartment, and every so often I take it out and just look at it, turning it over, like it's going to tell me something if I look long enough. I live in Saratoga Springs now, in an apartment building with other units on either side of me, and people coming and going at all hours, which used to bother me and now is close to the most comforting thing I can think of. I don't know who that man was. I don't know what he wanted, whether it was ever really about me specifically, or if I just happened to move into a house that had already caught someone's attention before I got there. I think about that woman who left before me sometimes. Wonder if she saw the same man. Wonder if she ever got a text about her car. I never found out. I don't think I ever will. Story 3. The neighbor who waved. I lived outside Chillicothe, Ohio, off Blaine Highway, in a small rental house my parents actually used to own back before I was born. This odd little piece of family history that made moving there feel less like renting and more like coming back to something. Ross County, rolling farmland, a lot of it, with the Scioto River cutting through parts of it. My place sat on about 2 acres, one neighbor visible from my kitchen window across a field, an older guy named Gary Holcomb, who'd lived in that farmhouse, by his own telling, since the 70s. I was 22 at the time, a senior finishing my degree online through Ohio University while working part-time at a feed and hardware store in town. Quiet life. I liked it that way. My boyfriend at the time, Derek, lived about 45 minutes away in Columbus, so most nights it was just me and my cat, Biscuit, in that little house with the field between me and Gary's place. I want to say clearly that for the first year I lived there, Gary was, if anything, a positive presence. He'd wave from his porch when I pulled in from work. He brought over a bag of tomatoes from his garden once, unprompted, left them on my step with a little note that just said, "Extra, enjoy," in shaky handwriting. He was maybe 70, 75, lived alone as far as I knew, drove an old, faded blue pickup that I could hear coming from a distance because of a loose muffler. Ordinary, harmless seeming. The kind of neighbor you feel lucky to have out in the country, where the nearest other house might be a mile off. Things started shifting, so gradually, I didn't notice it as a shift at first. Sometime around late spring of last year. It began with the waving. Gary had always waved when he saw me, a normal thing. Hand up, maybe a nod, done in 2 seconds. Starting around April, it changed texture somehow. He'd be out on his porch, and instead of the quick wave and going back to whatever he was doing, he'd just keep his hand raised, watching me, for the whole time it took me to walk from my car to my front door. I noticed it because I started timing my exits and entries to avoid making eye contact, checking his porch from inside my car before I got out. I told myself he was just old, maybe lonely, maybe his eyesight wasn't great and he was just making sure I saw him wave. I didn't want to be the kind of person who turns a sweet old man into something sinister in her head over nothing. I think about that a lot now, how hard I worked in the beginning to explain it all away, because the alternative felt unkind, felt like I was judging someone for being old and isolated. The next thing was small enough that I almost don't want to include it, except it's part of the pattern. I started finding my mail already out of the box when I got home some days. Not stolen, not tampered with as far as I could tell, just sitting on my porch step instead of in the mailbox at the end of my driveway. I assumed at first that the mail carrier had started leaving it there for some reason, maybe a new route, until I asked the actual mail carrier one day, when I happened to catch her at the box, and she looked at me a little strangely and said she always left mail in the box, never on porches, said it wasn't allowed even if she wanted to. I brought this up with Gary directly, trying to keep my tone light, just mentioned it in passing while he was out mowing near the fence line between our properties. He said he'd walked it up for me a couple times, said he didn't like seeing it sit out where raccoons could get into it. I thanked him. It seemed plausible. It also meant he was watching my mailbox closely enough to notice mail sitting in it and to time a walk across the field before I got home, which I didn't let myself sit with at the time. By June, I'd started noticing him out working in his yard at odd hours, specifically hours that lined up suspiciously well with my own schedule. I worked Tuesday through Saturday at the hardware store, usually home by 6 p.m. Almost every one of those days, Gary would be out front doing something, weeding, fiddling with his mailbox, anything positioned in a way that meant he'd see me pull in. On my days off, when I wasn't coming home at a predictable time, I noticed less of him. I only put this together because I started, almost as a private joke with myself at first, tracking it, noting on my phone which days I saw him out and cross-referencing with my work schedule. It lined up close enough that I stopped thinking it was a coincidence. The thing that actually scared me for the first time, really scared me, not just unsettled me, happened on a Thursday night in July. I'd gotten home around 6:15, normal time, and gone through my normal evening dinner, some TV, feeding biscuit, and around 10 p.m. I went out to my car to grab a bag I'd left in the back seat. It was warm out, still lightish at the edges of the sky even at 10, that long Midwestern summer dusk. As I was leaning into the back seat, I heard, distinctly, a voice from somewhere near the fence line, low, not shouting, just pitched to carry across a quiet field. It said my name. My actual first name, said once, like someone testing whether I'd turn around. I straightened up so fast I hit my head on the doorframe. I looked toward the fence and I could see, just barely in the low light, a shape standing near the tree line at the edge of Gary's property, close to where our fields met. Too dark to make out a face, familiar enough in shape and posture that some reflexive part of my brain wanted to say it was Gary, but I genuinely could not be sure, and something about not being sure while also half recognizing it made it worse, not better. I didn't answer. I grabbed my bag, went inside, locked the door, and stood in my kitchen with the lights off for a long time, watching the field through the window, seeing nothing, no movement at all, which somehow felt worse than if I had. I called Derek that night, told him what happened, and he offered to come stay the weekend, which he did. Having him there for those few days made everything feel almost normal again, almost silly in the light of another person's presence. Gary waved at both of us from his porch on Saturday morning, completely normal, friendly even, asked Derek if he wanted to see his garden, showed him around for 20 minutes talking about tomato varieties. Derek came back saying he seemed like a nice old guy, a little chatty, nothing alarming. I didn't tell Derek about the fence line incident being anything I still believed happened the way I remembered it, because by Saturday afternoon, with the sun out and Gary talking cheerfully about heirloom tomatoes, I'd half convinced myself I'd imagined the voice, or that it was some trick of sound across the field, wind carrying some other noise into a shape that sounded like my name. Derek left Sunday evening. I was back to my normal routine by Monday. And Monday night, close to midnight, I heard footsteps outside my house. Not on the road, not near the fence. Close. On the gravel path that runs along the side of my house between the kitchen window and the fence line, a path barely wide enough for one person, that nobody had any real reason to walk unless they were specifically walking along the side of my house. I was in bed, not asleep yet, and I froze the second I heard it, the crunch of gravel, slow, deliberate steps, moving from the front of the house toward the back. My bedroom window faces that side path. I did not get up and look. I lay there in the dark, absolutely still, listening to the steps pass beneath my window and continue toward the back of the house, and then stop. I don't know how long I lay there after the steps stopped. Long enough that my legs had gone stiff from not moving eventually, and I still don't fully understand what gave me the nerve. I got up, very quietly, and looked out the window facing the backyard. I could see, in the moonlight, a shape near my back porch, standing close to the house, not moving, facing the wall rather than the yard, like they were looking at something on the siding or listening. I called 911. I gave the address in a whisper, told them there was someone outside my house right now. The dispatcher kept me on the line, told me to stay away from windows, stay quiet, deputies were coming. I sat on my bedroom floor, below the window line with my phone pressed to my ear, and at some point, during that call, I heard the gravel crunch again, steps moving, this time faster, away from the house, toward the field, toward Gary's side of the property. By the time deputies arrived, maybe 12 minutes later, there was nothing and no one. They walked both properties, my yard, and with Gary's permission, since they went and knocked on his door too, his yard as well. Gary answered his door in pajamas, said he'd been asleep for hours, seemed confused and a little offended at being questioned, though he was polite about it, said he hadn't heard or seen anything unusual. There were footprints along that gravel path, though gravel doesn't hold detail well, just disturbed stone, enough to confirm someone had been there, not enough to say who. Nothing on my back porch had been touched or moved that I could find. Though for weeks after I kept feeling like small things were shifted slightly. A chair not quite where I remembered leaving it. That kind of thing that's impossible to prove and easy to dismiss as your own anxious brain, rearranging your memory of a room. I moved out about 6 weeks later, at the end of August, breaking my lease early, eating the cost because I could not make myself stay another month. My parents helped me find a place in town, an actual apartment complex with shared walls and a locked building entrance, which after that summer felt like the safest place I could imagine. I never confronted Gary directly about that night, and I want to be honest that to this day, I don't actually know it was him. It could have been. The shape by the fence that first night was consistent with his build, but it also could have been someone else entirely, a stranger who happened to pick that stretch of road, and Gary really could have just been an odd, overly friendly old man whose habits happened to overlap unfortunately with a bad summer. I've turned this over so many times, trying to decide which version I believe, and I genuinely don't. Both feel equally possible to me, which is its own kind of unsettling, not knowing whether the person you're afraid of is a stranger or someone who waved at you almost every day for over a year and once left tomatoes on your porch with a nice note. The detail that stays with me, the one I never resolved, is something my mom mentioned almost in passing months later, when I finally told my parents the full story instead of the edited version I'd given them at the time. She said that when I was a baby, before I was born actually, back when my parents owned that same house, they'd had a strange summer too. A summer where my mom said she kept feeling like someone was watching the house from the field, though nothing ever happened that she could point to specifically. And they moved out not long after I was born, sold the house to a family who eventually sold it to whoever the landlord was, who rented it to me decades later. She'd never mentioned it before, because it had just been a vague, unprovable feeling to her, nothing she thought was worth bringing up. I don't know what that means, if it means anything at all. Maybe it's nothing, two unrelated bad feelings decades apart in the same house. The kind of thing that happens in any rural area with enough empty fields and enough isolation to make anyone's imagination run in the same general direction. Or maybe there was always something about that field, something that had nothing to do with Gary specifically, and he was just as unlucky to live next to it as I was. I still drive past that road sometimes, when I'm visiting my parents and take the long way. I've seen Gary's truck still parked in that driveway, still faded blue, still that same loose muffler sound when it passes me on the highway sometimes. I've never stopped. I don't think I ever will. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking with me through all three of these. I know none of them wrap up neatly, and I think that's kind of the point. Real fear doesn't usually come with an explanation. It just leaves you with a locked door, a light you check twice, and a question you never quite get to answer. If any of these felt familiar, if you've had your own off moment out in the country somewhere, a light that shouldn't be on, a face at the fence line that didn't belong, I'd genuinely like to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. Some of the best stories I ever cover started as a comment on a video just like this one. If you want more of these, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there, and maybe check your locks tonight.